This is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the Democratic Socialist Congresswoman from New York's 14th District. On December 11, 2020, AOC released a video talking about her first term in the House of Representatives.
Hey everyone, so I have been seeing progressive officials around the world do this challenge where we try to squeeze in all of the accomplishments from the last 2 years in 2 or 3 minutes. And since I'm coming to the end of my first term in office, I thought we'd try to do the same.
Technically, she's accomplished very little, so unless she talks really slow, 2 minutes is probably overkill.
2 years and 2-ish minutes. So let's set the clock. Let's try to do it. Ready? All right, let's go.
This is going to be amazing.
This term, we successfully passed legislation to move $5 million to treatment for opioid addiction with funds shifted from the DEA.
AOC is referring to this moment on June 20th, 2019, where she offered an amendment.
I rise today to offer an amendment moving $5 million from the Drug Enforcement Agency and into the Comprehensive Opioid Abuse Program, which is part of the Department of Justice funding of initiatives to combat the opioid epidemic.
So the Comprehensive Opioid Stimulant and Substance Abuse Program, yes, she got the name wrong, is run by the Bureau of Justice Assistance. The DEA and the BJA operate under the DOJ. So moving funds from one part of the department to another really isn't that big of a deal. So both Democrats and Republicans were like, whatever, and voted in favor of the amendment. The DEA's budget for 2019 was $2.86 billion, so AOC successfully moved 0.174% of their budget to COSAP. Way to go, Congresswoman, you're making a difference.
$10 million in funds to clean up toxic bombardment sites in Vieques, Puerto Rico that were getting people sick.
AOC is referring to the cleanup of a former US naval range used for military training exercises on the island of Vieques in Puerto Rico. And the site is littered with tons of unexploded bombs, rockets, and other munitions. The Navy has been getting rid of old ordnance by the practice of open-air detonation, which some experts say is bad for the environment. So Congresswoman AOC and Senator Elizabeth Warren both introduced amendments to the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2020 that would allocate $10 million to purchase and operate a portable closed detonation chamber and water jet cutting system. Both the House and the Senate approved, and the amendment made it into the 2020 defense budget. So you gotta give her credit, she's 2 for 2 so far.
I repealed the Fair Cloth Amendment in the House, which paves the way for the U.S. to build more public housing for the first time in decades.
She is referring to a section of the Housing Act of 1937 known as the Fair Cloth Amendment, which basically limits the construction of new public housing units. Guess whose repeal of the Fair Cloth Amendment just passed the House? Fair Cloth has blocked construction of new public housing in the United States for 20 plus years. Repeal is key to tackling our housing crisis. Thank you to the advocates who've worked so hard to get here. But her contribution only passed the House, not the Senate, which means that nothing changed. That is not an accomplishment.
Passed legislation in the House to ban funds going to the transfer of lethal military equipment to Bolivia.
AOC is referring to Section 9013 of H.R. 7608. None of the funds appropriated or otherwise made available by this act may be obligated or expended to transfer lethal military equipment or crowd control equipment to Bolivia. This language was put in the bill as a response to violent protests in Bolivia over voter irregularities in their 2019 presidential election. But as AOC mentioned, this section of the bill was only passed in the House. Again, not an accomplishment.
Introduced more amendments than 90% of freshman lawmakers in the House.
I know that was fast, so let me clarify. Of the 88 freshman House members in the 116th Congress, AOC introduced more amendments than 79 of them, which seems to imply that she's doing more work than them or something. So how many amendments did she introduce? Well, according to Congress.gov, AOC introduced a grand total of 6 whole amendments. Weird flex, but okay.
I authored and introduced the Green New Deal with Senator Ed Markey and secured 115 House and Senate co-sponsors on it.
Ah yes, the infamous Green New Deal. I've done a couple of definitive videos on the subject, so I'm not going to get into great detail here, but the rollout of AOC's signature legislation did not go well. Along with a draft of the Green New Deal resolution, her office released a fact sheet that talked about fully getting rid of farting cows and airplanes. It's like a 5-year-old wrote it. Or that we're going to build out so much high-speed rail that air travel stops becoming necessary.
How do you take a train to Europe? You know, this...
The fact sheet also stated that not only would we not build new nuclear power plants, but we would also decommission all of the existing nuclear power plants. Which is strange considering that nuclear power is a zero-emission energy source, and getting to net zero emissions is the main goal of the Green New Deal. So, releasing a fact sheet that contradicted the legislation was confusing.
Can you explain where the Green New Deal stands on nuclear power? There's just a confusion after the initial fact sheet went out that said there was no room for nuclear. Is that where you stand on this?
The resolution is silent on any individual technology, which can move us towards a solution of this problem. This is a resolution that does not have individual prescriptions in it. So it is silent, the resolution itself.
So there was a fact sheet that said no nuclear.
That is not part of the resolution.
And AOC's FAQ gave opponents of the bill all the fodder they needed to rip it a new one.
In a future without air travel, how are we supposed to get around the vast expanses of, say, Alaska during the winter? Well, I'll tell you how. Tauntauns, Mr. President.
It turns out that the biggest accomplishment of AOC's first term was completely undermining what should have been her biggest accomplishment. Womp womp.
Regional versions of the Green New Deal were also adopted by 10 local governments, including the state of New Mexico and cities of Austin, Los Angeles, New York City, Boston, and more.
She's trying to take credit for these regional versions that she had nothing to do with. That's definitely not an accomplishment.
I authored the Just Society suite of bills.
The Just Society suite of legislation consisted of 4 bills and a resolution, none of which actually made it out of committee. Anyway, I made a video about this one too, so check it out at the playlist at the end of this video. Regardless, introducing go nowhere bills is not an accomplishment.
I introduced the Loan Shark Prevention Act with Senator Sanders to cap credit card interest rates at 15%.
I made a video about that one too, by the way. Gee, I make a lot of AOC videos, huh? Anyway, the Loan Shark Prevention Act, like every other bill that AOC has introduced, never made it out of committee for a floor vote. Not a single one, so no accomplishments here. That's what happens when you don't pay your mandatory dues to the DCCC. Sad, really.
I co-sponsored 78 pieces of legislation that passed the House, 14 that were signed into law.
Co-sponsoring a bill in Congress is about as meaningful as a Facebook like. You didn't write the legislation, you had nothing to do with it. It just means that you support the work that someone else created. And according to Congress.gov, Ocasio-Cortez co-sponsored 526 pieces of legislation. Pro tip, if you want to brag that you've co-sponsored a piece of legislation that was signed into law, just co-sponsor everything. And while we're at it, let's take a look at some of these pieces of past legislation. 6 of those bills renamed post offices. 1 was to rename a wildlife refuge. 1 was to honor the women featured in the film Hidden Figures with gold medals. 1 was for issuing commemorative coins. 1 was to honor Greg LeMond with a Congressional Gold Medal. And 1 was to honor Rosie the Riveter. Wow, how riveting. Oh, come on.
Pressured Facebook to fact-checking political advertising.
And that pressure was so intense that Facebook stuck by their policy of not applying fact-check labels to paid political advertisements. Now, third-party fact-checking of articles and posted videos, that's another story, but it doesn't apply here.
And exposed Mark Zuckerberg's dinner parties with radical right-wing figures.
Okay, first of all, AOC didn't expose these dinner parties, Politico did. Second, these radical right-wing figures included Tucker Carlson, Ben Shapiro, and Hugh Hewitt. I'm surprised that she didn't call them the alt-right. Here's a clip of AOC exposing Zuckerberg during a Financial Services Committee hearing. Let's watch.
One more question. In your ongoing dinner parties with far-right figures, some of who advanced the conspiracy theory that white supremacy is a hoax, did you discuss so-called social media bias against conservatives, and do you believe there is a bias?
Congresswoman, So I don't remember everything that was in the in the question.
That's all right. I'll move on. Can you explain?
Did you see it? Did you see all of the exposing? She didn't expose anything. She asked Zuckerberg a question and wouldn't let him answer. This chick is insane.
We got President Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, to state on the record that President Trump was engaging in tax fraud and to name other potential witnesses.
Michael Cohen pled guilty to 9 charges, including tax crimes, violating campaign finance laws, and lying to a Senate committee, but I'm sure that everything he told AOC was on the up and up.
We overturned the unjust citizenship question on the census.
No, you didn't. AOC is taking credit for a Supreme Court decision. The f***ing balls in this woman. And finally,
And I was nominated twice in the Democracy Awards, which was the first time a member of Congress was recognized in 2 categories.
yes, AOC was nominated for 2 Democracy Awards. However, you may recall back in April during a virtual debate that AOC was bragging about winning those 2 awards.
But I am happy to say that our office has set a record in that we have received 2 congressional awards.
But as it turns out, she doesn't know how to read, because the April press release for the Democracy Awards announced the finalists, not the winners, and clearly stated that the winners would be announced in a few months. But I gotta give it to her, bragging about winning awards that you ultimately won't win is quite the accomplishment. And I'm gonna end it there. Thanks for watching, sharing, and slamming that like button. Follow me on Twitter and Parler at Don't Walk Run. Be sure that you're still subscribed to the channel, and I hope to see you next time.